Natalie rolled down the window, both hands resting neatly on the steering wheel, a silent declaration. She had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, her voice calm and professional, honed through hundreds of meetings, interrogations, and emergency drills. Maddox leaned down, the beam of his flashlight sweeping directly across her face. In his mind, the light wasn't just for visibility, it was a test. Those who flinched, looked away, or squinted at the glare usually had something to hide. But Natalie didn't. She sat completely still, eyes unblinking. "License and registration," Maddox said, curt and direct. He didn't like women who looked like they had things under control, especially when they didn't lower their eyes. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" Natalie said. She had already guessed this wouldn't be a fair exchange, but she stuck to the protocol. Not to defend herself, but to preserve the record. Maddox chewed his gum slowly, deliberately not answering. He watched her. Alert face. Just enough makeup. Clean car, paperwork that didn't raise any flags. But something about her rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was the ID badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Maybe it was the gaze, too steady, too calm. "Documents," he repeated, this time without pretending to be polite. Natalie understood the signal perfectly. There was no more room for negotiation. She slowly leaned over to retrieve her wallet. Every movement was intentional, slow enough not to seem suspicious, steady enough not to be mistaken for fear. "Step out of the vehicle." The words slipped out before he had fully weighed the consequences. Not shouted, but heavy, cold, and unilateral. Natalie looked up. "Excuse me." "Step out of the vehicle." Maddox's hand hovered close to the grip of his gun, a reflex hardened into habit, as if his authority lived in the Glock, not in the badge. The air between them tightened, drawn taut like a wire. Natalie knew all too well, she had just stepped into a rigged game. A place where logic wasn't the rule, power was. But what Maddox didn't know was this: she had played at tables like this her entire life. And she knew how to turn the game, not with a weapon, but with memory, authority, and a cold precision forged in silence. The straight highway stretched toward the horizon, yellow streetlights flickering above reflected off the polished black sedan gliding smoothly along the asphalt. Natalie Pierce, the newly appointed director of the FBI, sat behind the wheel, her gaze occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror, though most of her mind was still caught in the high-security briefing she had just left. Her schedule was tight as wire, her shoulders burdened with the weight of national responsibility, but she was used to that. What she wasn't used to was the sudden flash of red and blue lights erupting in her rearview mirror. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. Speed, steady at 65 miles per hour. No sudden lane changes, no broken lights, no infractions. There was no reason to be pulled over. And yet, the patrol car was locked onto her. Natalie signaled, calmly pulled over to the right shoulder. Logic told her she had nothing to fear. She knew the law enforced it, had stood shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of officers in her career. But instinct whispered, something is wrong. The patrol officer stepped out of the cruiser. Officer Trent Maddox. Natalie didn't recognize him, but the tight posture, the cold stare, and the swagger in his steps told her this wasn't a routine stop. His right hand swung a flashlight. His left hovered close to the holstered weapon at his waist. Natalie lowered the window, both hands resting clearly on the wheel. "Good evening, officer," she said, calm, professional, voice honed over hundreds of interrogations, field briefings, and tactical drills. Maddox leaned in, flashlight beam slicing across her face like a spotlight on a suspect. "License and registration."
No gritin. No explanation.
Natalie's tone stayed even. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Maddox chewed his gum slowly, eyes locked on hers. "License," he repeated, tone flatter now, with less pretense of courtesy. "No choice." Natalie moved slowly, deliberately, every motion practiced, just as she taught her own agents. She reached across to the passenger seat, retrieved her wallet, and held out both her driver's license and a badge, FBI director, bold and unmistakable. Maddox didn't take them. He glanced, then stepped back half a pace. Out of the car. Not loud but heavy, a command, not a request. Natalie looked up. "Excuse me." Out of the car. His hand now rested against the grip of his Glock. The night went still. The air between them crystallized. Natalie knew exactly what kind of game had just begun, a dangerous one, where rules didn't matter. But what Maddox didn't know was this. She had played games like this her whole life. And she knew how to win, not with fear, but with memory, authority, and silence sharpened into steel. The click of the door handle sounded like a siren in the night. Natalie's left hand braced firmly against the inside of the door, her eyes locked on the beam of the flashlight still aimed at her face. "Officer Maddox, step back." Her voice was steady. "You are violating standard traffic stop protocol." He didn't move. In fact, his other hand tightened on the door handle, the veins on the back of his hand stark beneath the glare. "I said get out of the car." His tone reeked more of control than duty. Natalie knew this type. The kind who wore the badge like a crown, the gun like a throne. She had interrogated dozens like him. But this time, she was on the other side of the barrel. "I am exercising my rights under federal law. Without probable cause or an arrest warrant, I am not obligated to exit this vehicle." Maddox smirked. "Your law doesn't apply out here." One sentence. A confession. This wasn't about a traffic violation, this was a power play. And he was losing. Suddenly, Maddox slammed his hand against the hood of her car. "I said out." Natalie didn't flinch. She had heard gunfire closer than this. But this action was telling, he was unraveling. She caught his name on the badge, T. Maddox. She logged it. "You're setting precedent for a federal civil rights lawsuit," she said evenly. "Every second of your conduct is being mentally recorded." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning, from someone who had led investigations that brought entire departments to their knees. But Maddox didn't care. His hand hovered dangerously close to his holster, one breath away from snapping it open. And then, headlights flared in the rearview mirror. Another patrol car. A flicker of relief crossed Natalie's mind, a witness. But when the door opened and another officer stepped out, no name tag, same cold stare, she knew, this was reinforcement, not rescue. The new officer approached, standing shoulder to shoulder with Maddox like it was routine choreography. "What's the issue here?" "Driver's uncooperative," Maddox replied, eyes still locked on her. The second officer didn't ask questions. He looked Natalie up and down, then spoke. "Step out of the vehicle. Immediately." "No, Ms. Coldwell."
No, director.
"Just driver." Natalie swallowed the fire rising in her chest. Carefully, she lifted her hands from the steering wheel. She knew refusing would give them cause for escalation. Complying, however, put her life in the hands of men who saw her as nothing more than a challenge. "I will exit the vehicle. But I request this interaction be audio and video recorded in full." No response. But they both took a half step back. Natalie slowly opened the door and stepped out, hands still raised. The night air bit at her skin, cold and sharp. But inside her, the fire had already caught. Natalie's foot had barely touched the pavement when Officer Maddox stepped in, his shoulder pressing close enough to block the view from his own patrol car's dashcam. The second officer kept a strategic distance, but his position was calculated, forming a flank maneuver, the kind used in high-control extractions. "Turn around," Maddox ordered. "I haven't been informed of the reason for detainment," Natalie replied, her voice flat and unmoved. "Suspicious behavior." "Failure to comply," Maddox said, reciting it like a boilerplate justification. Natalie turned halfway, eyes scanning and committing the patrol car's license plate to memory. As Maddox advanced, he grabbed her wrist, hard and without warning. Pain shot through her arm as his grip tightened. "Let go. Now," she snapped. "This is assault on a federal officer." "Looks like a combative civilian to me," Maddox growled, tightening his hold and signaling the other officer forward. The second cop stepped in, one hand already brushing the radio on his shoulder. "Unit 47, we've got a non-compliant subject. Potential threat." Subject. Not citizen, not official, not director. Just a label, a threat. Natalie knew too well what came next if that framing held. One misstep, one wrong word, and what followed could be irreversible. Maddox's other hand dropped toward his holster. A quiet click broke the night, safety off. Natalie raised both hands higher, voice cutting clean through the tension. I am FBI Director Natalie Kane. If you draw that weapon and take one more step, this becomes a federal assault case, with full jurisdictional consequences. Silence. The kind that stretches thin across the bones. Maddox's eyes flickered, hesitation, calculation. But he didn't release her. Then, a voice from across the road. I'm filming everything. All three turned. About 30 feet away, a middle-aged man stood on the sidewalk, phone raised, the glow of the screen stark in the dark. You really want to draw on the FBI director? On camera, he said, voice calm but heavy. Let's see how fast that goes national. Maddox froze. The wind swept through the asphalt corridor, rustling leaves, but none of them moved. It was a tableau of exposure, authority cracked open under scrutiny. Natalie said nothing more. She locked eyes with him, unblinking. Her stare asked the question, how long before you undo yourself? And then, a siren wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flared across the highway. Backup was coming, but not for those pretending to be in control. Red and blue lights strobed across the pitch-black asphalt. 3 patrol cars screeched to a halt in unison, tires biting the road with a high-pitched wail, the sound of real authority arriving. Natalie stood unmoving in the crisscross of emergency light, hands still raised, eyes locked on Maddox, who still held his gun, though his hand now trembled. Not from the wind, but from knowing the game was over. A commanding officer stepped out first, tall, solid, his lieutenant badge catching the glare. His eyes scanned the scene. The moment he saw Natalie, he froze. Director Kane? He asked, voice caught between shock and caution. Natalie slowly lowered her arms. No nod, no spoken confirmation, just a single look. It was enough. Everyone instantly understood who she was. Maddox faltered. His grip on the gun loosened. His eyes darted, searching for an exit. But it was too late. I want both officers detained immediately, Natalie said, her voice calm, steady, each word like a stamped order. The second officer, the one who tried to seize the witness's phone, opened his mouth to speak, but Natalie cut in, razor sharp. Not another word. If you want to explain yourself, save it for the disciplinary board. The lieutenant blinked, then signaled to his team. Cuff them. Both. You've got to be kidding me, Maddox snapped. I was just doing my job. You pointed a gun at the FBI director, Natalie said coolly. Is your job now to be afraid of black women driving the speed limit after dark? Maddox's face flushed, not from anger, but from the slow-burning realization that for the first time, he couldn't intimidate anyone. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrist like a slap across the face of everything he thought made him untouchable. The other officer didn't resist. He bowed his head, knowing every door behind him had just slammed shut. Natalie walked up to the lieutenant. I want their disciplinary records pulled by tomorrow morning. Copies to the office of the director and the Internal Oversight Committee. The lieutenant nodded tightly. And one more thing, Natalie said, eyes piercing his. If anyone on your team thinks they can bury this quietly, they'd better think again. A heavy silence fell like a curtain. At the edge of the road, the man with the phone still stood, still filming. When their eyes met, he gave a single quiet nod. No words were needed. The truth was already on its way to where it belonged. Maddox was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car, wrists cuffed in front of him. The strobing lights washed across his face, illuminating every tight muscle, every crack in the composure of a man who had just lost everything: power, reputation, and the illusion of invincibility. Natalie Kane stood upright on the side of the road, night wind threading through her hair. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. For people like her, justice was never about triumph. It was about a process that could no longer afford delay. The lieutenant approached, phone in hand, voice cautious. Director Kane, media outlets are already picking up the story. There's a video, it's spreading fast. Natalie nodded. Good. Silence once protected men like them. Now truth will do the opposite. He hesitated. Would you like us to issue a preliminary press statement? No, she replied firmly. The statement will come from the Department of Justice. And I will write every word. She turned and walked to the man still holding his phone, the witness who had done more with one timely sentence than any weapon ever could. What's your name? She asked. Marcus, he said. Marcus Lee. Less than 24 hours after the incident, America wasn't talking about anything else.
The story dominated every front page, every evening broadcast, from major national networks to independent news blog.
In the age of saturation, it had cut through like a blade. Natalie Kane sat in the 9th-floor conference room of FBI headquarters, faint light filtering through frosted glass. On the table in front of her, 3 phones buzzed in rotation, calls from the White House, the Attorney General, members of Congress. She didn't rush to answer. Instead, she faced a team of senior legal and investigative advisors, all waiting for the next directive. "We're not just investigating 2 officers," Natalie said evenly. "We're investigating the entire system that protected them, including those who received misconduct reports and did nothing." A young advisor hesitated, then spoke up. "That's going to trigger serious pushback from the police unions." Natalie looked up. "Good. If they're pushing back, it means we're hitting the right nerve." An older advisor, voice lower, added,
"You're putting a target on your back." Natalie tilted her head slightly, no hésitation.
"I was already there.
Last night, on a deserted stretch of road.
I know exactly what it feels like." The room fell silent. Outside, the public was sharply divided. Half the country stood with Natalie, calling her the woman who didn't flinch. The other half accused her of dividing law enforcement, of humiliating the badge. But Natalie had never been one to govern by popularity. She didn't seek to be liked. She sought the truth. That afternoon, as she stepped out of the building on her way to the Department of Justice press conference, a young FBI staffer was waiting at the curb.
Director Quinn.
She paused. "Yes." He handed her a small envelope, inside, 3 handwritten letters. One from a retired police officer. One from the mother of a victim assaulted during a wrongful traffic stop. And one from a 16-year-old boy in St. Louis. "I never thought someone that high up could understand what I feel every time I hear a siren behind me. Thank you for not bowing your head." Natalie folded the letter carefully. A gust of late afternoon wind tugged at her coat. She looked ahead, toward the line of cameras already in place. The press conference would begin in 10 minutes. And this time, nothing would be buried beneath the phrase internal procedures again. At the Department of Justice, the podium stood ready before dozens of camera lenses and reporters from every major and minor news outlet. The air was heavy, almost metallic. Everyone was waiting to see, what would FBI Director Natalie Kane do with the power she had just proven she possessed? When Natalie stepped out, there was no aide announcing her, no entourage. She stood alone. The lights hit her face head-on, cool, unflinching, but her eyes were razor-sharp. "Last night," she began, voice calm and measured, "I wasn't just the director of the FBI. I was a black woman, driving alone, obeying the law, and still had a gun pointed at my face by someone wearing a badge." A few people in the room drew sharp breaths. "I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because we need to confront the truth. This was not an exception. This was a consequence." She paused, then continued. "A consequence of a system that has allowed some to believe power is a shield for any action.
Last night, he survived.
But hundreds, thousands of others did not." Cameras panned the press room. Some reporters nodded, others simply scribbled, eyes wide. "I am ordering a full investigation into the local law enforcement agency involved," she said. "And we are reopening all previously dismissed or ignored complaints tied to Officers Kearns and Evans." Then she looked directly into the lens, as if addressing the nation. "This is not just an investigation. This is a declaration. If you choose to wear the badge, you're choosing to serve, not to rule. And if you forget that, we will remind you. With law."
With conséquences. Her final word landed like a verdict.
She left the podium, no bowed head, no waiting for applause. She didn't need validation for the authority she had just reaffirmed. Behind the curtain, an aide approached, whispering, "Public response is tipping in your favor." Natalie adjusted the top button of her blazer and replied, "I don't need them to lean. I need them to wake up." 3 days after the press conference, the city felt like it had finally awakened. The video of the incident continued to spread, but this time, it sparked more than outrage, it sparked action. The city council convened an emergency hearing. Civil rights groups demanded full transparency on every officer's disciplinary record. People who had been unlawfully stopped by Kearns and Evans began to speak out. An elderly woman recounted how her son was shoved face down onto a car hood despite doing nothing wrong. A college student remembered being threatened with arrest for looking suspicious. And through it all, FBI Director Natalie Kane stayed off camera. She didn't dominate the headlines. Instead, she let the voices of the community rise. She listened quietly, taking in every story, every detail, turning memory into testimony, testimony into evidence, evidence into policy. At the federal office, a small task force had been formed, the Misuse of Power Response Unit, reporting directly to Natalie. No fanfare. No press releases. Just a simple wooden placard on the door, and one goal: to review every case dismissed for lack of evidence. Kearns and Evans were no longer the focus. They were symptoms. The real issue was the system that had allowed and protected them.
On a Friday afternoon, Nathalie left it Carter. No security detail.
No government car. She walked through a quiet plaza near the federal courthouse, where the man who had recorded the video was now hosting a grassroots community forum. He saw her, gave a small nod. "I thought you'd be up there speaking," he said. Natalie shook her head, a faint smile playing at her lips. "No need. Today's not my turn." She sat on a wooden bench near the edge of the plaza, blending into the crowd, just another listener. Because real change doesn't always come from behind a podium. It comes from a world where no one is forced to stay silent anymore. As autumn touched the edges of Washington, D.C., a crisp wind swept through the city, carrying with it quiet but profound change. The FBI headquarters was no longer just a place of agents and clearances. It had become the epicenter of a reform quietly rippling across the nation's law enforcement institutions. Director Natalie Kane stepped into the internal conference room, where field office directors from across the country were already seated. She didn't carry a prepared speech. Only a slim binder, its cover marked, OCSI Citizen Oversight and Safeguard Initiative. "We all witnessed something that should never have happened," Natalie began. "Not because I'm the director of the FBI, but because I'm a citizen. And if it happened to me, it's already happened to thousands without a camera, without a title, without anyone to speak for them."
No one whispered. No one interrupted.
Every head was turned toward her. She continued, calm but unwavering. "This is the blueprint for a new internal oversight platform. Every traffic stop, every use of force, every civilian complaint will be recorded, encrypted, and reviewed independently. And I will personally oversee its implementation." A field director from the southern region raised his hand, hesitant. "There will be pushback. Not everyone is ready for this." Natalie met his gaze, not with judgment, but quiet resolve. Justice has never waited for people to be ready. After the meeting, she left the building again, no motorcade, no sirens. Only the wind brushing through her coat and a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in months. At a small coffee shop across town, the man from that night, the anonymous but vital witness, sat quietly reading the paper. He looked up, saw her, and smiled. "I guess you're famous now," he said. Natalie took the seat across from him. "I don't need to be famous. I just need to make sure it doesn't happen again." A warm silence settled over the table. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside, leaves began to fall. But here in that quiet moment, something had been restored, not reputation, not recognition, but trust.